One of my maternal great-grandfathers was called Charles Haight. He was born in Germany in 1908 and immigrated to Canada with his family at the age of 19. Because he left Germany in 1927, he is considered to be part of the wave of German immigration between the two world wars. 100,000 German immigrants came to Canada between 1924 and 1930. Your father was born in 1908 and lived in Germany until 1927. Can you tell me a little bit about where he grew up and the political climate of the time?
He grew up in a little village, Teiserdorf, near Lake Constance. He could see the Swiss Alps from his bedroom window. One of the things that I always found my favorite story was when they were little, their nanny was a St. Bernard.
Hmm.
And so when I read Peter Pan later, like I always, well, that's just normal. That's how normal people are, you know. And so the St. Bernard would look after them. And he can remember, you know, if they started trying to get into trouble or something, the St. Bernard would pick them up at the back of their shirts and back them over. And, you know, because he remembers it, you know, and plopping them right between her puppies.
Oh.
And one time, for one of his girlfriends, he he described how he climbed off this because the Edelweiss. Remember when you sang that song for me?
Yeah.
And that's what my dad used to sing that song, and he'd tell about climbing out onto a cliff and going down the side of a cliff to get this little flower for a girlfriend.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So they clearly had a very happy childhood and life in Germany for the most part.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay, so clearly like things had to go down in Germany for them to decide to move to Canada. Do you know like some turning points that might have influenced that decision? Due to the First World War, numerous German companies and families were struggling to get by. Worst of all, Germany had lost 15% of its male population. For the most part, the surviving German people were poor and unemployed. To add insult to injury, the Treaty of Versailles didn't just blame Germany for the war, it demanded financial restitution for the whole thing, to the tune of 132 billion gold marks, or about 269 billion American dollars today.
In this book that I had, and she said when she was asked, the economy and employment after the First World War was very bad for many years in Germany. Inflation in the early 20s was a nightmare, when towards the end a loaf of bread cost 1 billion mark. Because they had been talking about, I'm sure, going. But my granny Berta was virtually bedridden with asthma and arthritis. The doctor said that she might have only 6 months to live. About that time, the Canadian land people came and issued an invitation to the people there to come and populate the West. Grandpa Fidel went to one of the meetings and talked to the person about the climate. When he heard that it was a dry climate, he didn't have to hear any more, and he said, "We're going." After she was there a few days, she was up and moving around fine. It was like a miracle, my Aunt Paula said. She lived another 20 years in Canada.
Many German immigrants chose to come to Canada in order to exploit the fertile prairie lands. The dry climate was ideal for wheat farming. Moreover, in 1927, the Canadian Commission of Immigration classed German immigrants as the preferred class. Wow. Do you know how much money he had to like pay beforehand for the land in Manitoba?
Yeah, this is another thing from the book. In order to become a shareholder of this society farm, it was called a society farm in Canada, each farmer had to deposit 5,000 marks in Germany.
Did he talk about missing Germany ever, like to you guys, or wanting to pass down that culture?
Oh no,
Okay.
no. And he didn't want us to be hyphenated Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
To him, So we didn't learn to speak German like a lot of other, families in our area. We didn't learn to speak German because of what Germany was becoming.
Yeah, so it would have been leading up to World War II.
Yeah, yeah,
So
because it was 27. So
yeah,
that was just when Hitler was really on the rise.
yeah. So speaking of Hitler, there's a story that my mom told me that your father went to go see him
Yeah,
speak in a beer parlor. So can you talk a little bit about that?
he and his dad, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, to hear him.
If you see
Yeah.
where Hitler was speaking at,
Hmm.
it was like that. And I guess everybody was just roaring with, oh,
Yeah.
you know, you know, and the one thing that Grandpa and my dad thought was, it's absolutely ridiculous what he's saying. It was absolute nonsense. But it worried them because, any politician can mesmerize people is, something to be careful about.
During the late 1920s, the rise of the Nazi Party led to violent rioting. Many Jewish Germans and German speaking Eastern Europeans fled Europe using aliases. So, on the passport that you sent me, there's all the names of all the children and the parents, and there's an extra name,
Mhm.
Ludwig, that I think they added just Haid as a last name, but we know that's not his actual last
Yeah.
name. So, who is he? Where did he come
Yeah.
from? Yeah.
He was um, a neighbor friend. They grew up with him, and his dad was my grandpa's best friend. He didn't have the money to come over. He just sat down with Grandpa and said, "Can you take Lou?" And Grandpa said yes.
Yeah.
And later, um, I know Uncle Lou told me that he said that he wanted him to keep his last name
Yeah.
because he didn't want his friend's
Yeah.
name eliminated.
Yeah.
You know,
And that
it
was
was important that
Strasser, the last name.
Strasser,
Yeah.
yeah.
And of course the family was Jewish, so he never was reunited.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think the reason why the father wanted to send his son was because of the rise of anti-Semitism?
Yes, it was. Oh, yes.
So
Coming up.
a bit about the journey to Canada. So,
Oh, yeah.
so as you mentioned, your father first came to Canada by ship and then by railroad. So can you talk a little bit about the name of the ship, how long the journey was?
Um, it was 2 weeks, and it was the Marlock. And when the ancient engines of the Marlock failed, and stormy weather with more than half the people badly seasick, that's what Dad remembered was
Yeah.
couldn't go out on the deck because waves would come right up over the boat and just wash right over the people.
So, of course, he traveled through the Atlantic Ocean. So, what was the
Yeah,
pier that he first got off of? Because Manitoba is obviously landlocked. So,
yeah. It was St. John, not far from where Auntie lives.
so he first arrived in Manitoba in Little Britain. That's where he settled. So, can you tell me
Yeah,
a bit about?
Manitoba.
So, were there a lot of German immigrants that also established themselves in?
Yeah.
Many German immigrants at the time established themselves in Ontario or Western Canada. Today, over 3 million Canadians have German heritage.
That's because when they went into town, into Austin, there were German-speaking people with them. So as soon as the first trip into town, they started learning English.
Mm.
And they were, because it was very important for them to assimilate.
How did your father learn English?
Basically, going into town and talking with, especially the owner of that one general store, and and then just learning English
Okay, so
by
basically,
communicating.
yeah,
Um, they would get in trouble when they went back because it was a Catholic priest who sort of ran the community, and he did not want them to learn to speak English. He says if you lose your language, you lose your religion and everything like that.
yeah. Mom told me that as your father got older, like I don't know, like I guess maybe his German accent got more pronounced, or it was harder for him to communicate. And Mom remembers like him calling her like Schmetterling, which means butterfly, and like that's their most prominent memory.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's better link. Yeah.
So, with his accent, did your father face any discrimination for being German?
Um, well, when they were in South Sudan, when the war came, uh, he basically lost his job because of the German being German. But even though had already got his British subject, because all Canadians were British subjects at that time.
Yeah. Your mother was a Canadian girl named Mary. So how did they meet? I find that story very cute.
Yeah, they met at a dance because my dad was in the band playing for the dance, and he played. I guess you would call it the violin, but it was a fiddle because he played that kind of music.
Yeah.
And so that's how they met.
Yeah, I love that story. Your
Yeah.
family later moved to Aldergrove in British Columbia, where Charles was an important member of the community. Can you tell me a little about his contributions to his town?
He was um, chairman of the fair board and then president of the Agricultural Association, which was basically just the same. My dad came up with the idea of the Rose Show after talking with an elderly gentleman in Aldergrove.
So another thing that I need to do for the project is I need to put a German song.
Would you know the one? Uh, that was my dad used to sing that to me.
Muss sie denn